Hi, my name is Alex Pender, and I'm Communications Manager here at Kids in Need of Defense. And today we are joined by our pro bono attorneys of the month, Brian Rubin and Amber Unwala from Eversheds Sutherland. And we're so excited to have them here to talk about a recent asylum win that they just got back for their client Diego in Arlington, Virginia. So I'm going to turn it over to them so we can hear about this amazing case. So Brian and Amber, could you give me just a little bit of background about yourself? What type of legal work do you guys do at Eversheds?
Sure, this is Brian, and I do securities enforcement work. I primarily represent broker-dealers and investment advisors being examined and investigated by the SEC and FINRA, and I used to work for the Securities and Exchange Commission.
Hi, I'm Amber, and I also do securities enforcement litigation as an associate here at Eversheds.
Awesome. And how did you both first hear about Kind, and really what made you get into doing these type of pro bono cases?
Well, I've been doing asylum work since I was an associate more than 20 years ago, I guess. And I think that they are terrific cases for young attorneys as well as older ones, because you don't need an intimate knowledge of the law. You can learn the law as you're working on the case. And the key thing is to try to tell your client's story. At Eversheds, we work with a lot of different organizations when we get asylum work, including Kind. And I think at some point, a blast email came around from Kind, and we ended up getting Diego's case from that.
And I've just started in September, and I have always been interested in immigration law and specifically asylum. And I expressed my interest to Brian, and we had this pending case going to trial, and I thought it'd be a great way for me to get involved.
Great. And could you guys give me a little bit of background about Diego's asylum case?
Sure. So, like so many young individuals that are coming into this country, Diego had been in limbo through the asylum process since 2012. And he left Honduras at that time because he was fleeing gang violence. His older cousin had been taken to be in a sort of a quote unquote relationship by one of the local gang member leaders. And the leader, after taking her, would sexually assault her, beat her multiple times to the point where she eventually was able to escape. And after she was able to escape, Diego took on the role of serving as her protector. And because of his relationship to her, which was more of like a brother and sister relationship, because of that, the gang leaders they started targeting Diego, and they started beating Diego and threatening to kill him. And his older cousin was eventually able to leave the country, and once she left, the gang leaders started to target Diego more and more, and they started increasing their threats to Diego and towards his family as well. And they were asking him, "Where is your cousin?" And when Diego would refuse to tell them where she was, the gangs started beating him, and eventually it got so bad that Diego had to leave the country and come to the United States. And because of all the trauma that he had gone through, he had suffered from PTSD, which was one of the bigger issues with the case.
And initially, Diego was interviewed by an asylum officer, and unfortunately, he was not successful in front of that asylum officer. Either he didn't adequately explain his story, or the asylum officer didn't understand how his facts apply to the law. And we ultimately had a trial in front of a judge, and we were able to convince the judge that he did have a basis for staying in the United States, and asylum was granted to him.
Well, that's amazing for you all and for Diego that his asylum grant was, accepted after 6 long years. Very exciting. But what would you say, through that whole process that you've learned from that experience of working with Diego?
So I learned that the most important part about representing these young individuals who are often leaving behind their families, they're coming to the country alone. The most important thing is to understand that they're probably going through something that is really frightening to them. They're coming to a whole new country. They are unfamiliar with the immigration process. They're unfamiliar with the language here. And so as attorneys, it's important for us to remember that we're not just trying to help them as being attorneys, we're also trying to help them just because they need to stay in this country. And it's really important to understand that building that relationship is the only way that you're going to be able to get all the facts necessary to adequately represent them.
And it's important and interesting, not just for pro bono cases, but for pay clients as well. You need to have a relationship of trust and confidence with your client. Otherwise, you won't be able to do a good job with them. And I think the other interesting thing with dealing with a minor, particularly in this kind of situation, is that as lawyers, people who dress up in suits, we're really part of the establishment. And I think it's often difficult for minor clients coming from other countries to understand that even though we are part of the establishment, that we really are trying to help them, and we do have an important role to play within the establishment so that they can hopefully end up staying here.
Absolutely. And how would you both say, like, you've changed as a result of working with Diego and working with these child clients?
So for me, as a young attorney, this was one of the most rewarding experiences that I've gone through. I have just learned that I have the skills that are necessary to help these young adults and young children that are coming into the country. And so providing that pro bono representation is a really important part of being an attorney here.
And the cases are significant and interesting for the reasons why Umber pointed out. Somebody could have a perfect case, a perfect justification for coming to the United States and staying here and getting asylum granted, but unfortunately they don't have the education or the tools, the knowledge, or the background to present their case in an effective way. And lawyers are very important for that process. And often without lawyers, these folks just wouldn't be successful, and they'd be forced back to their country and possibly tortured or killed.
And specifically on that, do you think that, knowing how Diego's case went, do you think that he would have been able to represent himself?
Definitely not. It was really important that we were there to help him through the entire process. We were able to retain an expert witness who testified towards the country conditions in Honduras. A really big issue in our case when we were presenting it to the judge was that the judge was a little bit skeptical about whether Diego could safely relocate in Honduras. And that was the determining factor, one of many, but it was a large factor in the outcome of the case, where our expert witness was able to persuade the judge that no, Diego would not be able to safely relocate anywhere within the country. And that was why it was so important for him to be granted asylum. Without those financial resources, Diego would not have been able to retain the expert witness, let alone know to retain an expert.
Yeah, the case was very interesting because the judge, in effect, had a dialogue with the expert. The judge was asking the expert about the country, about particular areas in the country, why somebody new can't end up in a different part of the country, what the gangs there would think. And Diego certainly didn't know about retaining an expert. As Umber said, he certainly didn't have the financial wherewithal to pay for an expert. So our ability to provide that knowledge and those resources to him was very, very helpful.
And, you know, the last question before I let you guys go, what would you tell other attorneys who are thinking about taking on a kind case?
I would definitely encourage other attorneys to take on kind cases. These children come into the country and they really need the most fair opportunity to go through the process, and attorneys are able to provide that to these individuals. And it's really important for us as attorneys, as again, like both Brian and I have said before, we have the skills and the tools that are necessary in order to represent them. And it's important for us to give back and help those that are most vulnerable in our society.
Yeah, kind offers unique opportunities to lawyers who are able to do pro bono work, because you are helping out, as Umber said, the most vulnerable. And ultimately, you're really changing generations to come, because if Diego had not been successful here, he would have been sent back to his country. He likely would have been tortured and possibly killed. And because we were fortunate enough to be able to get the case from Keene and from Kind and be able to help him, he is able to stay here. He has a baby now, and we are literally changing generations to come.
Absolutely. Well, that was beautifully said, Brian. And thank you so much, Umber and Brian, for being here and for working on Diego's case and helping him receive asylum. It was so wonderful hearing from both of you.
Thank you.